Dear African Confessions, I am back with another episode. There is a message that I want to share with you guys. The message reads like this. Hi, how are you, Brother Nashi? Can you please hide my identity? I am a man who is 39 years old. I got married at the age of 25 and now I am in my second marriage. My problem is that I can't get my first wife off my mind and I don't know why. Maybe it is because of the way that she died. My first wife died whilst she was giving birth. My story goes like this. When my mother saw me walking around with my girlfriend, who was my first wife, the one that died, she would say that my girl will never be a daughter-in-law, saying that she was a prostitute who was busy sleeping around with married men in our village. I then thought that maybe my mother knew what was going on with my girlfriend, so I then pressured my girlfriend to sleep with me. At first, my girlfriend refused to have sexual intercourse with me before marriage. She said that we should do it only when we are married, but I kept on pressuring her because I was thinking of all the things that my mother kept on telling me, like my girlfriend was a prostitute who was busy cheating on me with other married men in our village. My girlfriend later gave in because of the pressure that I was giving her, but on the night that me and my girlfriend made love, that was the night that I found out that she was still a virgin. I was surprised, especially because of what my mother was saying about her. She then became pregnant and she came to stay with me. She came with her auntie and my mother pretended as if she had accepted her as her own daughter-in-law. But when my girlfriend's auntie left, my mother started mistreating her and me. We were no longer cooking at the same place. My mother gave us a place to cook. The place that my mother showed me and my wife, saying that this is the place that I want you to cook. It was not a good place. It was not comfortable. There was no shelter, especially if it was raining. We would have to cover ourselves with a plastic bag so that we can cook. Things were very tough for me, Brother Nashi. The pregnancy grew to about 5 months and I had nothing like money. Before I started staying with my first wife, whenever I went to work, I would bring something home. But at that time, when my wife was staying with me, I would get nothing. I remember that I once went to work with some guys who were doing these things of gold panning in our village. I started having a running stomach and I went to help myself, but something like a miracle happened because I went into this bushy area and I spent about 2.5 hours helping myself. When I came back to the mine where me and my friends we were busy working, I then found out that my friends, they had gone underground, and as they were busy working underground, one of the guys had found out a huge rock that had some good gold deposit in that rock. When my friends that I was working with at that time picked up this huge rock that had a lot of gold deposit in it, when they went with that rock to the smelting plant, they were given a lot of money. Each one of them bought new cars. But as for me, when I returned from the bushy area, I found out that they had already gone to the smelting plant and I could not claim their gold because when they picked up that rock, I was not with them. It was pure bad luck. I returned back home with nothing. I told my mother everything that had happened whilst we were at the mine, but she wasn't even bothered. Instead, she said that my wife was the one who was bringing this bad omen. I was so hurt, but I kept on telling myself that I'll never leave my wife. I told myself that God will bless us both in His right time. The pregnancy kept on growing and still I had nothing. My mother kept on saying that this baby that this prostitute of yours is carrying is not yours. I will buy it clothes and I am the one that is going to feed this baby that this prostitute of yours is carrying. And it is true. That is what happened exactly, because for the preparation, my mother is the one that bought all of the preparations. And from the day that my wife had came to stay with me, my mother had given me and my wife a prophecy saying that she said to me, you will never be able to buy a preparation for this baby that your prostitute is carrying. I am the one that is going to buy the clothes. I am the one that is going to feed this baby, even if this baby is not yours. And that prophecy came true. Even the clothes that my wife had, they were torn and old. I couldn't afford to buy her clothes. As for me, I didn't have any shoes anymore. My shoes were torn. I was just walking barefooted around the village. If she was in a good mood, my mother sometimes would buy us some flip-flops whenever she would feel sorry for us. Even my friend once asked me if my mother was really my biological mother, because my mother would go to his mother's house since they were our neighbors. Whenever my mother would visit our neighbor, she would gossip about me. She would tell her that if it wasn't for her, we would be walking barefoot. We would be walking around the village naked. One day, I heard my mother calling my wife, saying, my daughter-in-law, let us go to church together. I was surprised because that was the first time hearing my mother saying to my wife, daughter-in-law, let us do this thing together. When I heard my mother calling my wife daughter-in-law for the first time, I went to where they were seated. Then I stepped in their conversation, because my mother was trying to convince my wife to go with her to church. And I said to my mother, I don't think that it is a good idea for you to go to church with my wife. Look, she's already close to giving birth and you will be going to church for about 3 days. But my mom told me to keep quiet. My wife saw that if she refused, this might cause further problems. And another thing, my mother was now threatening to chase us away, like me and my wife, saying that your father is dead and I am the one who set rules in this house. So I then agreed to. At that time, my phone wasn't working properly. It had a lot of problems. Then my wife started feeling pains whilst she was at church. All this I was told when my mother called me. I don't know if she called me as soon as my wife said that she was in pain, or if she just ignored her. And maybe my wife had been in pain for a while since she didn't like her. I then went to church so that I can go with her to the hospital. My mother said I should take her to hospital, and she said that she was going to stay in church so that she can pray for her daughter-in-law. My mother on that day, she was so friendly and loving towards me and my wife. She is the one who gave us the money for transport. I don't know if the money was a ritual money or what. We paid a bus to take us to the clinic first, and whilst we were waiting for the bus driver to give us the change, that bus driver then became violent towards me. He claimed that he had already given me the change, and the more that we argued, the more that he became angry with me. As we were arguing, that guy then just drove off, but he threw the money through the window. I took the money since it was the only money that I had. We went to the clinic. Whilst we were at the clinic, the nurses said that the situation that my wife was in was so critical that they couldn't assist us. Then they transferred us to a bigger hospital that is nearby our village due to my wife's condition. I took the money, then I paid someone who was there at the hospital to transport me and my wife to the provincial hospital. When we arrived at that provincial hospital, my wife was admitted. On the 4th day, that is when my wife died, and that is the same day that my mother came to visit at that hospital. All these 3 days, I don't know where my mother was. I don't even know how my mother knew that we were on that hospital, because I had never called her since my phone was giving me a lot of problems. The day that my mother came, that is when my wife died giving birth, and she was 10 months pregnant. Brother Nashi, it was quite surprising because my wife's pregnancy was full term at 9 months. Then she carried that pregnancy for another month to make it 10 months. Whenever the visiting hours would come, I would go in to see my wife, and you could see from her face that my wife, she was suffering from severe pain. I was feeling sorry for her. Maybe that is why I can't get her off my mind. And on my side, since I didn't have any money, it had been 3 days without eating. I was just surviving by drinking water, only water, Brother Nashi. There was this other nurse who had came to me and said that there was a church that was nearby, and that nurse suggested that I should go to that church and pray. That nurse said that everything that was happening to my wife, it was not normal. Maybe that is why I felt guilty, because after I had spoken with that nurse about the idea that I should go to the nearby church and find spiritual help, I consulted with my wife first. I told my wife about that idea, but my wife refused. She said there is no need for you to go to church, and she said that, look, the baby is coming. You can feel it. The baby is right here. Very soon this baby will be in the world. Don't worry. She didn't want me to leave her alone. When my mother came, my wife was then taken to the labor room, and she never walked out of that labor room again. I then saw the doctors and the nurse coming, and they were telling me that they did everything that they could, but unfortunately my wife had passed away. We arranged for the funeral and everything. On the day that my wife was buried, my mother then said she wants to take care of the baby, and no one opposed that. My mother was the one who took care of my baby, but I am hurt that my mother saw us suffering, but yet she did nothing. After my wife's death, my mother started showing care towards me. She loved me again as her own child. I then started dating another girl. She is now my second wife. When she came, she wasn't pregnant, but she had a child. So I was scared that if my mother find out that she already had a child, she won't accept her as her own daughter-in-law. But when she came to my mother only shouted at her on the first day. My mother shouted at me saying that I am such a fool. I should never get married to a woman that has been given a baby by another man. She just did this on the first day. The first night she was shouting at me and my wife, but when the morning came, I was shocked because my mother and my new wife, they were getting along very well. They were actually helping each other with all the house chores. My wife gets along very well with my mother, so much that if we fight and if she tells my mother, I'll get into so much trouble. But the way that they get along, it is so suspicious. Sometimes I think that maybe it is because of what happened to my first wife. That is the reason why my mother has changed her behavior. But in my first marriage, things were so bad, Brother Nashi. If you post my story, please notify me so that I can follow up in the comment section. Dear listeners, right there was a message that I received a while ago. Then I had to ask one of our admins to give us a translation, hoping that you were able to understand this confession. Let us meet again in the following episode.